Yo, what's the crack? Today's video is a blueprint on how to keep growing your triceps while you're traveling this summer and you have no access to your typical gym equipment. Stay tuned because this is gonna be a good one. The triceps account for about 2/3 of the total mass of your arms. Thus, this muscle group is bound to have the biggest visual impact on the overall size of your upper extremities. So the following question comes to the forefront at this particular time of the year. How can I train my triceps with my own body weight? You might be familiar with some of the lifts I'll be recommending in this video, but I'm certain that you're also going to learn interesting tips on how to make these exercises more triceps dominant. But before we jump into it, let me just say that I'm going to operate under two different assumptions. The first one assumes that you have no access to a calisthenics park, and number two is based on the assumption that you do have access to an area equipped with bars and stuff like that. The former would call for more frequent use of rings, whereas the latter would allow you to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to equipment. I couldn't have kicked off this section with any other lift. Dips have been granting greater pushing strength and upper body mass to those who have progressed them consistently for years. And more relevant to this video is the fact that the triceps are heavily recruited during dips. If you can only perform dips with rings, go ahead and do them. You're gonna get very good results anyway. However, I do think that this variation is more of a well-rounded movement rather than an exercise that is suited for maximum triceps loading. Ring dips develop superb stabilization skill and body awareness in space, not to mention the added benefit of using two objects that can travel in all possible directions. When you go down, the rings move sideways, and when you go up, you can bring them together. So from a hypertrophy standpoint, you can overload these key functions of the chest much better than when your hands are fixed to a bar. Additionally, if you rotate the rings inwards at the top, you're also conditioning the connective tissue around the elbow joint, which is great to improve your straight arm strength. All these attributes could be very valuable, especially for those of you whose training style mainly draws from the gymnastics world. But for triceps hypertrophy, I would encourage you to stick to dips with parallel bars if you have access to a calisthenics park. Here's why. Due to the unstable nature of the rings, these implements render dips as a self-limiting variation. In other words, you are not going to be able to complete nearly as many reps of ring dips as parallel bar dips. Put it differently, if we're using external loads to compare the two, you can't use the same weight to complete an equal number of reps for each version. In fact, ring work of any kind could be extremely humbling even for advanced lifters if they've never trained with these before. So, if mechanical tension is a key hypertrophic pathway for lifters, you would want to use the maximum weight possible to target specific muscles. And given that the elbow extension dynamic is very similar in both dip variations, you should pick the one where you can use the heaviest resistance, that'd be dips on parallel bars. Perhaps you're a bit confused because I've been using the terms external load or external resistance throughout this section, even though this is a tutorial on how to grow your triceps with your own body weight. Well, this is where resistance bands come into play. The elastic property of resistance bands makes them almost as good as free weights for the lockout during a dip. When you grab a resistance band with both hands and loop it around your neck, you're essentially adding weight to the top part of the lift, which also happens to be the phase where the triceps become more relevant. Since the lockout of a dip mainly consists of elbow extension, this anatomical function perfectly correlates with the band reaching its maximum stretch. However, let me point out that this form of accommodating resistance is not something magical or groundbreaking. I'm just offering you a way to add tension in a context where there are no physical weights available to you. In fact, bands have their own limitations. They can only overload the shortened position of the triceps during elbow extension, not the lengthened position at the bottom, which happens to be where more muscle fiber damage occurs. So, from a hypertrophy standpoint, bands do an okay job at bringing additional tension to the dip without the need of carrying around weights. But as I said before, this resistance bonus is not acting in the most optimal angle. A viable solution to this issue would be to perform both partial dips in the bottom half of the exercise and dips with resistance bands. As for the latter, please be mindful that the pecs are not going to experience this additional tension. The chest is more active at the bottom, which happens to be the part where the band loses all of its elastic force. So a simplified way to understand the accommodating resistance of a band in this particular case would be to look at banded dips as weighted at the top, but body weight only at the bottom, thus taxing your triceps very heavily during the lockout, but sparing your chest at the bottom from the same level of intensity. At this point, you were probably expecting something like a closed grip or a diamond push-up, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but I think this variation is superior for triceps development. Yes, both a closed grip and a diamond push-up place more emphasis on the triceps than a regular push-up. And yes, there is no denial that most beginners could still make really good gains with these two other exercises over time. But if we're looking to boost arm growth this summer, I don't want you to do just a push-up exercise with an extra kick for the triceps. I want you to do a triceps exercise. For this movement, you don't actually need the gymnastic rings because you can do it on the floor, but I personally prefer doing it with a bar. It just feels better on my wrists, and I feel like I'm doing a JM press. This lift, the JM press, is an accessory movement used in powerlifting circles that is meant to hypertrophy the crap out of your triceps to eventually get a bigger bench press. So all I'm doing here is taking a leaf out of the powerlifting book and apply it to a calisthenics context. The main difference between this kind of bodyweight JM press and a push-up of any kind lies in the mechanics. During a traditional push-up, there is a high degree of shoulder extension, just like we saw in a dip, which means that the pectoralis muscle is going to play a key role in the concentric portion, especially as we get out of the hole. However, if we minimize the movement at the shoulder and make it up for it at the elbow joint, we can reach a maximum degree of flexion here. Now, it is mostly the triceps, the one muscle group that has to work the hardest to come back up. An easy way to tell these apart is by looking at the elbows. In a regular push-up, your elbows travel past and behind your body. In a bodyweight JM press, your elbows remain in front of you. If you use a bar, just make sure that you're resting your body at the bottom of your palm next to your wrist and not in the middle of your palm like you would normally grab a barbell. Otherwise, you'll get into a highly uncomfortable extended wrist position that can cause you pain. Do not try to grab the bar, but rather rest on it. If you're a complete beginner who's new to calisthenics in particular and resistance training in general, trying to get stronger at both dips and close grip push-ups is probably going to be your best bet to grow bigger triceps. But if you like the way the bodyweight JM press challenges your elbow extension strength and the movement agrees with your body structure and you feel amazing doing it, then why not go ahead and progress this lift for the next few months. In fact, the Sphinx push-up is a perfect blend between a compound and an isolation lift. And as you're about to see in the next section, this calisthenics JM press might be the closest exercise to your typical gym isolation movements that many noobs might be able to do. Why? Because the technical barrier to entry for the next lift will be too high for most novices. The third movement I'm going to recommend is the overhead tricep extension. This is a lift I covered extensively in the past, but today I'm going to revisit some key aspects. Out of all of the movements I've discussed so far today, this is, without a doubt, the hardest one to get the technique down. The requirements to entry are pretty high for the average person based on my experience coaching beginner clients with no sports background. If you attempt to do this lift several times, and every time it's a struggle and you feel like you don't even know what the hell is happening to you, just don't do it. Instead of getting anxious about not being able to do this particular exercise, focus on the other alternatives I've given you in this video, like dips, the close grip push-up, and the bodyweight JM press. For those of you with good body awareness in space and sufficient core strength, this is what I want you to do. You would want to sustain a long isometric contraction in a plank position. Do not flex at the hips. Always stay on the tip of your toes to minimize the unloading of the movement. Let your body sink forward by flexing your elbows past your hands. Once you reach maximum elbow flexion, overcome the resistance explosively so that you can do a powerful lockout. And remember that extending at the elbows does not mean rocking your entire body backwards. which would unload the lift and defeat the purpose of the exercise. As you can see here, there are many moving parts during this exercise, so it might take some practice to learn the technique properly. But if you manage to do so, you'll be able to unlock a calisthenics movement that heavily targets the long head of the triceps, which is the largest one and thus the one that is going to have the biggest visual impact on your arms. The higher you keep your arms while extending at the elbow, the more the long head is going to be recruited. Yeah! The gym version of this exercise would be something like an overhead tricep extension with a pulley. I personally like this version better, if only because I can assume a stronger position with my body to focus exclusively on what happens at my elbows. But if I'm traveling, which is likely to happen this summer, calisthenics is always there to offer me a solution. The last thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the huge potential of having a good set of resistance bands when it comes to training your triceps on the road. You could get away with so many things as long as you carry them around. You could still get a good stimulus, at least at the lockout. You could also use them for a gnarly superset after a compound lift. That is also an option. Or for a finisher drop set at the end of the workout to cause a great deal of metabolic stress in the area. Or even to enhance your recovery if you simply perform high rep sets far away from muscular failure during off days. And this is the function I personally exploit the most throughout the year. If I have an off day but I still want to do some active recovery work, I simply do different movements for high repetitions with resistance bands. Here the goal is not to overload, of course, but rather to expose the body to low intensity but quality movement as well as healthy blood flow. So far I've talked only about exercise selection. Now let's discuss all the important variables you need to take into consideration to get the desired results, aka hypertrophy of the triceps muscle group. Frequency. When it comes to frequency, I like to overload elbow extension at least 3 times per week and ideally, although not necessary, have 3 active recovery days where you focus on light banded work for very high repetitions just for the purpose of getting a pump. An example of this structure would be to train on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, while you drive blood flow / stimulate elbow extension the day after every training session. Because hypertrophy is your main goal, I want you to focus on tonnage accumulation and progressively do more work as weeks go by. If you can't reach 8 reps in the first set of a given lift, I'd like you to pick a regression, aka decrease the intensity. If you surpass 12 repetitions in the last set of any lift, then I would encourage you to notch up the intensity the next time you do this exercise. Volume is highly individual, but because I'm trying to address a large audience of beginner lifters, I'm just gonna give you some general recommendations. As a general rule of thumb, I would like you to complete a bare minimum of 12 to 14 sets in the first week of your program and only add sets under the 2 following scenarios. A. You can improve on the total number of reps you do for a lift in a workout for 2 straight sessions. Or B. The progression of a lift is too high of a jump in intensity that you reach muscular failure before completing 8 repetitions in the first set, which is the lowest number I want you to work with. Needless to say, the only way you can know about all this is if you track your workouts. Speaking of muscular failure, as a beginner, your ability to gauge your true level of effort in a set is going to be your worst enemy. You will want to quit before you should in most sets because you are not used to experiencing physical discomfort. But if you record your sets, you'll see a massive mismatch between what you perceived towards the end of the set as opposed to what your effort level looks like on your phone from an outsider perspective. So recording your stats and watching yourself post-training is going to be a major help. Working within 0 to 2 reps before muscular failure is a good guideline to give most people interested in building muscles, especially if we're talking about calisthenics movements, which traditionally have a very good stimulus to fatigue ratio. But because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot many times before you get the hang of this muscular failure thing, I would like you to make the last set of your workout an all-out, balls-to-the-wall effort. This way, you'll force yourself into situations where you can actually learn what muscular failure feels like, and at the same time, you'll ensure that at least once in a workout, you are certain that you have stimulated your high-threshold motor units. The purpose of showing you this clip is not to clown on these two fellas. I'm pretty sure that they are good lads and all. This clip is only meant to show you the lack of intent and effort most people put into their sets when they quote-unquote train. What you're seeing here is a complete waste of their time if their goal is hypertrophy. If your sets look anything like these, you need to step up your game in a major way and attack your workouts with a new level of aggression. Because the sad truth about this clip is that these guys are the same people that constantly blame genetics, program hop, call themselves a hard gainer, or crap like that. Don't fall into this defeatist and loser mindset. All you have to do is to grow a pair and stop lifting like a push. Check out these two videos. I think you're gonna like them. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell to get notified every time a new video goes live. Stay fit, stay strong, help me raise an army of Super Saiyans all around the world. Peace.